Hey guys, welcome back to Stripped Astrology with Sarah. Today we are finally going to be stripping the Capricorn woman after a long time of me telling you guys it's going to come out. I'm so sorry. I know it's usually supposed to come out like right after the man episode. And that came out a while ago, but I've had, a lot of things recently that I've discussed on recent episodes going on in my personal life, and it's just not allowing me to really commit as much time. But let's get started on the Capricorn woman. I'm really excited. Keep in mind that following this episode, we will have compatibility released for Capricorn woman and all of the men of the zodiac. Really, this episode is going to benefit you guys so much, especially if you know a Capricorn woman, you are a Capricorn woman, you're dating one, you're friends with one, you have someone in your family, a coworker. This is like a guide to everything you need to know about Capricorn women. Like if you want to know, what pisses them off, what's the best thing they love in relationships, what's their sexual style, how they usually tend to grow up and how that affects their psyche and their ruling planets and everything kind of astrology related, regarding the mythical, the Greek mythology, behind the sign and all that. So let's get started on stripping the Capricorn woman. So the Capricorn woman, she is like one of the most self-composed women in the zodiac. She's not going to be the show-off type. She's more of an elegant person. And she does not get impressed easily by external things, things such as fame or status or financial things. So self-respect is super important to her. And she does not get swayed easily by others' opinions of her. Instead, she really focuses on creating a quality life for herself, and she has really high moral courage and a big quest for spiritual knowledge. So her reputation is super important to her, and she's really determined to be valued as a person of substance. So she views life as kind of like a long, hard road that really requires pacing and careful negotiation. She's not going to be the risk taker type at all. She's never going to go after something that she's not sure she can accomplish. Instead, she's going to deliberately take baby steps toward that success, avoiding any shortcuts that might bring a sudden, rise or something unexpected, in her professional or personal life, because Capricorn believes nothing is worth achieving if it comes easily. Most of us are like, okay, well, it comes easy, let's do it. But Capricorn, she's more like, no, I want to achieve something that's actually feels like an achievement. So she has a really similar attitude towards relationships, like love and sex. And she rarely rushes into relationships. Instead, she kind of lets relationships grow over time. And she's usually attracted to a man who is intelligent and is strong-willed. And she really likes to aim for meaningful long-term relationships. She's not really into that short-term type of thing. And we will talk more about that in a second. So now let's talk more about the sign of Capricorn. I want to explain to you guys its ruling planet, what that planet means and what this sign represents and how that all kind of manifests into the Capricorn woman's psyche. So Capricorn is ruled by the planet Saturn. Okay, Saturn represents principles like restrictions, boundaries, containment, obligations, rules, regulations, all that boring shit. So it's really harsh. It's a harsh planet, but it's the type of planet that really gets us up. It gets us moving. If you listen to my weekly stripping the astrology of the week episodes, you would know that you know a lot about Saturn because I talk about it a lot with the transits we have going on. And whenever Saturn is kind of in the mix, it gets it gives us a big reality check. It's not dreamy like Neptune, like Pisces style. It's more straight to the point. You need to figure out what are your boundaries, what can you do, what are your limits, how can I do this? So it's really good for structuring and making things happen. And that's probably what Capricorns excel at the most, I would say. So given that, it kind of, I would say Saturn almost represents a father or authority figure. You could think of Saturn as the father of all the planets because it's the one that's hey, motherfucker, you're going to do this or else things aren't going to go good for you. So it's a bit hard to be ruled by a planet that is so harsh like Saturn. It puts a lot of anxiety on someone, a lot of stress, and Capricorn woman can tend to have a lot of anxiety attacks or just deal with a lot of stress because of that. So it's not the most fun of the planets for sure, but it does have its benefits. So the word Capricorn literally means goat horn. Okay, so it kind of represents the mythical horn of plenty, which let me give you a little bit of Greek mythology behind the Capricorn woman. So Amalthea, who was also known as the goddess Rhea in her totem animal form, she nourished her son Zeus after rescuing him from her crazy husband who was infanticidal. He used to love to kill all the infants, like any baby that was born. So pretty much like the story, how it goes is that Cronus, he represents the Capricorn man in Greek mythology. Okay, so Cronus and Rhea who represents the Capricorn woman, they were married and they were actually brother and sister as well. So they had 6 children together. The last was Zeus. And Cronus was paranoid. You know, he thought his children would end up usurping his throne because of a prophecy that was said that he would be overthrown by his offspring. So he really wanted to kill them all before getting the chance. And so before getting the chance, you know, to kill Zeus, because he killed them all except Zeus, he couldn't because he thought he killed him. But Rhea actually had disguised him as a stone wrapped in a blanket. And Cronus fell for this and swallowed the stone instead of the baby. You know, it's kind of absurd, but, you know, it's Greek mythology at the end of the day. But it's all about representation, guys. You know, don't take this shit literally. So that kind of gives you the impression that Capricorn woman will do anything to kind of safeguard what they value, and they're very protective. So meanwhile, Rhea gave baby Zeus to Amalthea, which I told you was her totem animal form, which was a goat representing Capricorn, to care for him until he got older, and he eventually, to his father's, you know, disliking, he overthrew his father Cronus. So that's kind of how the story goes. So Rhea is like a preserver goddess, and the Capricorn woman really personifies this archetype. You know, the Capricorn woman, she waits for the right moment to like launch her secret grand plans, similar to Rhea, you know, smuggling Zeus away. So this on the surface really signifies the Capricorn woman's need to safeguard and sustain the creative life she's been given. She perceives what certain Native American tribes refer to as the long body of her life, which is all about living not just in the now, but for the future and all time. So ironically, because she considers the whole of her life in every little thing she does, Capricorn woman probably lives more consciously in the present than any other person in the zodiac. And Saturn's energy, her ruling planet, really manifests here as a correction, like that which occurs after, like, you know, maybe like a rise in the stock market. And the Capricorn woman really embodies this sense of recovery of resources. We really find in her someone who is unwilling to waste time and energy. She's not restrictive in personality for restriction's sake, but instead, as the horn of plenty incarnate, she contains such bounties as she perceives them to be her birthright. Things like intelligence, health, and an overall ability to contribute to bettering the world and wanting to preserve resources. So like her Greek archetype Rhea, the Capricorn woman often has the last laugh, you know, in the same sense that, you know, the tortoise in the tortoise and the hare fable has the last laugh over the hare. So while many people press to achieve the external trappings of success, you know, not really prepared for the bumps that life gives us along the way, the Capricorn woman really has that ability to meet those challenges face on. She really tackles them before continuing forward, and she's usually the one left standing when so many others have failed. So time is really on this Saturn-ruled woman's side, and she is like the sleeper. I'm sorry, that's my little doggy in the background. She's like the sleeper of the zodiac, and she eventually rises to importance after a long period of being behind the scenes. So she really teaches all of us that the ultimate virtue of her 10th house attribute of patience, that rushing through life only makes you old before your time. And when you keep wanting more, it only creates more want. And she understands that better than anyone. So she really saves her energy, and it shows. She looks really well preserved far into her older years. She seems to almost get younger as she grows older, as if she were living backwards, like something we would all love to have. And Capricorn is the only cardinal earth sign of the zodiac. So the cardinal quality signifies initiative, getting things going. And what is essential, and the earth element represents substance. So the ultimate symbol of the cardinal earth combination is a mountain. And that's the very representation of eternity and preservation. Mountains are like the natural container of river valleys, especially lakes, where water is really protected and purified. And Capricorn's symbol is not simply, the mountain climbing goat, but it's a sea goat. And that's very important to know, because this representation can be read in two ways. It can be read as like the horned animal with a fishtail, or a mountain with a lake. And since Capricorn is a feminine sign, that means that the female of this sign embodies the quality element combination of their sign. I talked about that before in previous episodes, but to give you a brief overview, pretty much all zodiac signs are have a different polarity, either feminine or masculine. So if you are a female in a masculine sign, you are not going to match the polarity of your sign. So what that means is that instead of embodying the quality element of your sign, you are going to enact it. You are going to look for it in other people, and you're going to teach it to other people. But since Capricorn woman, and the Capricorn is a feminine sign, that means that she embodies the quality element of her sign. So she's going to be really, really Capricorn, down to the kind of Capricorn ruled bones, because Capricorn rules the bones. And the man is going to be more kind of like teaching, this type of stuff, and looking for it in other people. So the Capricorn woman is kind of like a mountain. She's like a solitary figure who really can't help but appear iconic to anyone she crosses. And ancient cultures usually associate mountains with the great mother goddess from whom all gods are born. And the significance of the goat as Rhea's totem is an all-giving animal, providing nurturing meat and milk and protective clothing. So the Capricorn woman really personifies this fundamental energy. She's like a living, breathing representation of the great or grandmother goddess. So it makes sense that the sign of Capricorn is associated with the age group of 63 to 70, which really manifests in the sea goat woman in so many ways. All zodiac signs are represented by an age. We start by Aries, which is represented by 0 to 7, and then we go up from there. So that really gives you a good idea for those of you who maybe don't have that much information on the zodiac. If you just go by the age, range for the sign, it will give you an idea of what this person really wants the most in life. Like for instance, Cancer, it will be like the age range of like your early 20s, and Cancers usually look for family, they want to build a home, they want to have children. Aries, they're like the little babies of the zodiac. They want to have fun, they want to play, they can get angry easily. So Capricorn is like in that, kind of retirement age phase, and that's why they tend to be calm, reserved, and, mature well beyond their years. So similar to the Capricorn man, but in less obvious kind of superficial ways, the Capricorn woman is something of a throwback to the past. She's old-fashioned in her values, hobbies, and interests. She's almost like a little old lady. She's like meticulous and exacting in her daily habits. And she's a bit of a loner. She easily becomes cranky in a crowd of more than a few others. And even when in a relationship, she really needs, that me time, that time for herself. And she isolates herself from her partner for most of the day. So the age group associated with her sign, you can also see it really take representation in her minimalist type personality. Her spiritual connection is also a big part of her life, just as it is, for most people of this age group whose thoughts usually become more naturally focused on the afterlife and death. So the Capricorn woman thinks about death a lot, but this makes her more acutely aware of her mortality. And this is what helps her actually to appreciate being alive. The 10th house, which is the house that Capricorn rules, has a motto, which is I use, which would suggest that one is concerned, with status, achievement, and a need to really establish oneself through honorable means, kind of rising to the occasion and responsibility, hard work, and self-discipline. She is not the type to ever rely on luck, the way her preceding sign Sagittarius does, for instance. Capricorn woman is instead really focused on active faith, something that manifests in her life in a number of ways. First, she usually believes in a higher power that really helps sustain her through life's ups and downs. And it keeps her more level-headed, than most people when encountering extreme hardship. She also physically acts like almost like one leading a religious life. She kind of rids herself of excess in her life, particularly like too much pride and ego. And she's naturally seeking to conserve the soulful aspect of herself. So she really uses her life to gain spiritual strength, which is a living testament to the saying, what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. And she avoids using shortcuts and easy ways. She's happy working her fingers to the Capricorn ruled bones to get what she wants out of life. Not just the resulting rewards, but the spiritual awareness and conditioning that comes with that process. So in doing this, the Capricorn woman really builds a metaphorical muscle for survival that most people just never develop. And water is symbolic in astrology for feelings, intuition, and the loving contents of the soul. And the watery aspect of this sign's totem being the sea goat, even though it's an earth sign, since it's a sea goat and is associated with water and land, she's almost like both of an earth and water sign mixed together. So she's really emotional. She doesn't show it because of the earth sign, but she is very emotional deep down. And she has this age-old spiritual wisdom to her that is really conserved by taking a slower pace toward achieving her goals and providing more lasting sustenance for survival. So the zodiac's sea goat woman often has more than her fair share of emotional baggage, to be honest. She deals with a lot of pain and hurt, which she carries around with her. But unlike the Capricorn man who views such aspects of his life as like a literal drag, the Capricorn woman finds a way to use her suffering as a tool for any number of creative inspirations to spiritual enlightenment. So nothing's lost on this pragmatic Capricorn woman. She has a knack for turning what others might see as hard or dull work into a dedicated practice. Also, truth be told, she's not always like a bundle of joy or sunshine, but many people usually find their Capricorn friends or colleagues or spouses rather gloomy because the whole of her life is like one long dark night of the soul, but it makes her deep. And that's what makes her so special. And it nurtures her in a spirit of compassion. So as the first sign of the final and fourth quadrant of the zodiac, which is associated with the metaphysical level of the soul. So the cardinal earthy Capricorn can be something of like a wanderer who often eventually puts the whole of her being into her spiritual pursuits. And she's like the poster child for Saturn's principles that we talked about, both in the sense of striving, for a strong mind, body, spirit connection, as well as, trying to form a perfect union with the essential energies of the universe. And at the very least, she is a decidedly grounded earth dweller, with an innate knowledge for spiritual workings. So one look at the Capricorn woman is really all it takes to sense her saintliness. Like, she doesn't sin often or easily. She appears to be as solid as a rock of ages, which for better or worse gives the impression that Capricorn is a safety zone. She's a life preserver. You feel safe when you have a Capricorn around. And that's a role that she might have found herself cast into early in life, because the Capricorn girl is typically born into a strict household, and at a time usually when her parents are experiencing growing pains in their marriage. And generally, she's usually the older child, usually the oldest or one of the older ones in birth order. The Capricorn girl becomes burdened with responsibilities, which tend to really rob her of a, fun and relaxed childhood. So the Seagoat girl is often kept down by self-absorbed parents who also count on her to offer emotional rearing to usually the younger siblings. In the extreme, her mother can be sometimes incapable of bonding with her or even showing her the slightest of affection. Her father is often an emotionally detached, though verbally opinionated character with whom achieving closeness is a bit difficult. But Capricorn will relate actually more easily with her father, often sharing at least an intellectual level of connectedness with him. And if ignored, the Capricorn girl may find self-destructive ways to kind of scream for attention. Things maybe like eating disorders and other such kind of manifestations of acute perfectionism might come into play. And there's a certain chaos in Capricorn's households growing up, and she finds it difficult to really secure a sense of privacy, just as she seems to be lost, if not forgotten, kind of in the shuffle of things. And the Seagoat girl is extremely sensitive, and the emotional scars that she forms make her seem like a hardened and guarded and somewhat defensive person when she gets older. So it's the undoing of this dynamic that can be seen as her signature kind of growing down as she grows up, because she's has so many responsibilities at such an early age. And like I said, she's kind of robbed of her childhood. So she kind of makes up for that later. So the further she climbs in her personal and professional ambitions, the more she'll need to get rid of that baggage that kind of threatens to weigh her down. The good news here, though, is that she generally does get rid of it. In fact, the Capricorn woman's life is primarily about lightening her load. You know, she's rarely the materialistic type that most astrologers will always, kind of make them out to be. Most astrologers will be like, oh yeah, Capricorns are such gold diggers, Capricorn women are gold diggers and this and that. All they care about is money. Like, that's not true. Actually, she's not materialistic at all. Still, even the more religious type Capricorn woman have a weakness for shopping at like designer boutiques, because quality is her signature. But material wealth is like rarely an end in itself. Its financial abundance is a means by which the Capricorn woman more readily uses to achieve that peaceful, carefree lifestyle that she lacked as a kid. Like, she may easily spend $500 on a pair of shoes, like designer shoes, but they'll be like one of the few pairs she owns, because Capricorn is really notoriously careful with all their belongings. So growing up, the Capricorn woman is typically like the nerdy, bookish type, often made to feel that she shouldn't, or worse, couldn't ever rely upon her looks. It's kind of like the ugly duckling story come to life. She's kind of like the definition of a late bloomer, often not getting her first period or hitting puberty, or filling out a bra until like well into her teen years. And then it's like as if overnight she kind of blossoms into womanhood. But she's ill-equipped to handle what she perceives as like negative attention, from boys, or, like seeing her physical attributes, which she kind of begins to play down. And because she wants to be respected for her mind, she doesn't want people to just look at her in like a superficial way. She wants to have a studious persona, primarily as a means for like winning some notice and securing her emotional survival. And the worlds of ideas, philosophy, and all liberal and fine arts disciplines are really, really fascinating to her. So she slips easily into that kind of bohemian crowd, sipping espresso, visiting museums, early on seeking out the more progressive, intellectual, advanced placements, and later maybe graduate level courses. But having been raised in a kind of sexually repressive home, dating may have been like kind of a no for her by her parents. So she's often kind of unaware of the natural appeal that she possesses to men. Or to women, whatever her orientation is, but she's unaware of that sexual appeal. So somewhat at a loss to kind of fully express her erotic urges as they arise. So the Capricorn woman seems the most untouchable of like any female in the zodiac. Little about her really suggests interest in inviting the attention of others. So Saturn's conservative rule over the Capricorn woman really determines that she focuses on herself, and rather than in any outward connection or concern for others. She's really not a show-off. She's an earthy and elegant woman, and she really cares about her own contentment. She achieves this through her ever-increasing self-esteem, And she doesn't wish to be approached by anyone that is going to see her on a superficial level. Sexual advances are generally put into this category by her. She may downplay her sometimes extraordinary good looks, wearing like understated or even decidedly unsexy clothing, or in dark, shadowy hues, black being not only her favorite color, but the one associated with her sign. So she kind of wants to remain as invisible as possible. But her hair is generally kind of pulled back in kind of that infamous large, she's got those infamous, large, dark almond shaped eyes. Usually, sometimes they can be colored, of course, but they're usually like almond shaped. She's often hidden behind her like glasses. They usually have glasses. There's something about her that just resembles like the typical librarian. She just looks like that typical goody two shoes character come to life. But the Capricorn woman seems to just be waiting, if not itching, to lose the glasses, loosen the bun, let her hair down, have some fun. So she chooses to realize her full sexual potential slowly, kind of blossoming in her own good time, rather than seeking to make some sort of splash. So she doesn't like the idea of being hit on, so she kind of stays away from the social scene, sometimes going so far in her attempt to appear off limits, kind of to defeminize her appearance. A list of famous Capricorn women to kind of get you a better idea of how they typically look and their demeanor are people like Diane Keaton. Diane Keaton's like typical Capricorn, the way she dresses, kind of like having a more masculine style than a feminine style. She's beautiful, but she kind of like, settles down on her beauty. Diane Sawyer, also another beautiful woman, but also kind of settles down on her beauty. These are all women, like I said, that are beautiful, but prefer to kind of butch it up a little bit in like tailored trousers, suits, or a tie. So the Sea Goat Girl is kind of like those people that I just described. Like she's always trying to kind of tone down her looks, unless she has someone specific in mind, which I will get to in a second. And Mary Tyler Moore, I don't know if you guys know her, but she is a Capricorn, and she went so far as to battle network TV executives in the 1960s, actually, for the right to wear her trademark Capricorn pants on the Dick Van Dyke Show. So on a deeper level, the Capricorn woman is a really serious person. She's not the type of person that would tolerate being toyed with at all. She has like an insurance against any such attempts to toy with her. And she has this like no nonsense approach and kind of intimidating character that will keep flirts and flatterers kind of at bay. She seems to have invented kind of the standoffish technique. It's her like default demeanor to keep people from even getting too close physically, emotionally, or otherwise. So the Capricorn man might fancy himself as like a VIP member of some club of his own making, but the Capricorn woman is an exclusive, she's in an exclusive league of her own. She's typically not accepting any new applicants, only the closest of family and friends and maybe a teensy bit of loved ones ever experience her highly selective offerings of affection. But if you do experience it, trust me, you are lucky, because Capricorn, when they love, they are really there to take care of you, to do everything for you, and they're very giving. But yeah, she's like the living embodiment of her, preserver goddess archetype Rhea. So she's concerned with her own survival, especially financially and spiritually. Capricorn kind of she's like, when she's approached by someone, even in the most harmless, casual manner, her immediate reflex is to fight back, setting her fact into like a blank expression. She's gonna offer like just, one quick one-word response. She's gonna give you that blank expression and just give you a one-word response, whatever's being said, kind of refusing to make eye contact, in hopes of kind of getting rid of any like unnecessary interaction. So the Capricorn woman is really suspicious of compliments, even though she's kind of secretly thrilled by them, but still she's wary that such comments are kind of, like compliments are usually what happens before people start to flirt with you and, come on to you. So that's why she kind of, is on guard for compliments, but she does like them. But with any small talk, she just gonna give a hasty retreat. She hates small talk. but she'll always give you a polite excuse. She'll never like be rude about it. So she's really a tough nut to crack, overall. She appears the part. She's either very tall or very short. She usually has an upright posture, holding her head high upon her long, slender neck. She literally has a prominent nose, like her exotic, almond kind of shaped eyes are usually watchful and defensively darting. And she usually has perfectly bowed brows that are arched suspiciously, and kind of, a dome-shaped forehead with a high hairline. And she usually likes the hairstyles that, buns or putting your hair up. That's typically her go-to. She has strong cheekbones. They tend to go rather unnoticed, as her cheeks themselves are usually big, but rather than sunken. She usually has big cheeks. Her jaw and bold chin are really strong. She has a upturned kind of tip nose usually. And, it could be even like a nod to Capricorns associated with enduring hardship. Like I said earlier, because the Capricorn woman often kind of manifests physical evidence of her sign's metaphoric struggles. Whatever sign it is, like whatever kind of physical attributes are usually associated with this sign, they usually like imitate the stuff that we talked about earlier, like her upbringing and how she's typically raised and all of that. So she usually actually has like actual scars, typically on her face, kind of like a visible reminder of being dealt a bit of a shitty life, emotional or otherwise. And there's really one sure way to penetrate Capricorn's defenses, which is to really launch into a conversational topic that really instantly reveals intelligence, show her that you're intelligent. Most of all, insightful. She's entertained by her own running commentary, and she's really willing to bat around others' perspectives as well. And there, you may see like a sudden shift in her kind of interaction as kind of like caution turns into concentration. She'll kind of nod and cluck her tongue in acknowledgement, should something along the lines of social criticism enter, the conversation. And Capricorn is a really keen observer. She's eternally attentive. She cherishes that quality in others. And in her younger years, much to the eye rolling of her peers, she was that girl who like sat in the front and center of the class, pencils sharpened, hanging onto the teacher's every word. I mean, we all know who that girl was. A girl or a boy, there's always at least one in the class. And as Capricorn matures, a certain kind of studiousness continues to define her. So at some point, it may conflict with whatever inherent creative impulses she may possess. But seriousness, structure, and scholarliness are fused together kind of into a solid mountain of determination. And that really defines the Capricorn woman's essential struggle, how and when to let her signature reserve slip and make room for more like spontaneous interactions and serendipity. Or when it comes to a potential sexual connection, how to move on from arrogance to naughtiness, a transition which is especially difficult for the Capricorn woman to make. So Capricorn's trademark unwillingness to take risks may be actually associated in part to her sign's association with the age group of 63 to 70, which also goes a long way in explaining her conservative style and her love for black and granny glasses and cross pendants and other such religious talismans. The Capricorn woman tends to go gray early in life. But like I said, she usually stays looking young, even though she goes gray early. Combined with her typically white and smooth skin, it makes her appear older than her years in her early days, but younger later. Capricorn woman from darker ethnicities, will also be lighter, and you'll find them kind of more porcelain skinned than other females in her family. But as she matures, the reverse happens. Capricorn woman begins to look younger and younger. And as the years pass, her appearance seems to kind of alter a little bit like a mountain. She appears the very symbol of self-preservation. So when it comes to exercise and meditative disciplines such as, stretching, yoga, Pilates, or dance that call for mind, body, spirit connection, that appeals to her the most. Besides, given her delicate Capricorn ruled joints and those fragile knees of hers, as the zodiac's old lady doesn't do too well with high impact activities. So those are perfect for her because yoga especially suits her. She tends to master it and she is patient. So that's a really good attribute to have if you're learning something like yoga. She appears anything but sporty. She's kind of like an hourglass figure and often has a weighty bone structure, though she is kind of delicately shouldered with long, skinny arms. The Capricorn woman generally possesses large breasts and typically like a tiny waist, which gives way to wide hips. Long-waisted in the extreme, she is rarely leggy. And while she's happy to expose her forearms, wrists, calves, and ankles, she tends to conceal her more like solid thighs and her ass. So that's typically what she tends to look like. But despite any external attempts at trying to look more boyish, when she's naked, you will definitely see that feminine side of her. Like it's indisputable. There's no hiding it then. So it does take this woman a lot of time to let down her guard and simply kind of hop into bed with you. And speaking of bed, let's get more into her sexual style. So Capricorn is not the kind of woman to go for a quickie. Okay, she must share at least some measure of, being familiar with the guy. Even if she were to go for a one-night stand, for instance, with say some stranger she met at like a coffee shop, she would have to had an experience of an immediate intellectual and spiritual connection with him. The brain is like the only organ that Capricorn is really concerned about. And it's typically those guys who wear glasses at whom she'll make passes at. Such signs of intelligence, whether real or imagined, really pique her curiosity. But should he turn out to be an actual scholar, then, so much the better. And to be sure, there's a certain vanity in Capricorn's selection of a man, as she believes that she herself would appeal to a thinking man, far more than a guy with like a football for a head. So from her younger years, she has been rather shy of macho guys, all too often having suffered bullying in her younger years when she was still kind of the ugly duckling in school. And she really found solace in the brainy, artsy crowd among whose geekier members she may have had crushes on. So since her youth, she has been fascinated by men with some kind of genius to them and the potential willingness to realize it. Even when choosing to marry, the Capricorn woman rarely thinks in terms of whether a man will provide her with financial stability like most astrologists claim. This Saturn-ruled woman learns early on to furnish herself with any necessary material grounding, looking older than her years. When she's young, the typical Capricorn woman will have, started securing paid work for herself, often disguising her age, since before her teens. So she's kind of, saving money away for her highly anticipated independent life far away from home. And she's really a firm believer in human rights, and indeed in human responsibility. So she's going to soar to whatever heights that can be achieved through dedication to one's artistic or intellectual callings. And the necessities of life, such as money, are to be used as a means of achieving such ends, not as an ends in itself. So relationships, like everything the Capricorn undertakes, are shows of active faith. She goes on instinct. So she sees beyond the mundane, even passing such luxuries that other women might drool over, such as expensive cars, elegant restaurants, nice jewelry. All that kind of stereotypical shows of wealth can seem wasteful to her. She prefers to invest any extra cash in items that may enrich her life in a more meaningful way. Still, sometimes her expectations of a man are a bit lofty. She may confuse creativity with craziness or talent with mere talk. And often her early partners, though notoriously few, are far between, like the ones that simply cannot live up to the hope that she just puts upon them. She usually has a very high bar set for them. And there's always an element of pressure to being the Capricorn woman's partner. She becomes the projected embodiment of a man's own potential or her partner's own potential, if not their elusive greatness. And the flip side, his inability to live up to such aims. So it really must be said that the Capricorn woman is often guilty of more than a little projection, even kind of being a hypocrite in a bit. a bit of a hypocrite. Sorry, she's a tough lover who really urges a man to take on tremendous challenges, but she might not even admit, to her own hopes and dreams. And this dynamic goes a long way in explaining why she can be such a late bloomer, because she eventually applies those same expectations to herself, usually once her partner is no longer in the picture, or he no longer requires or desires her instruction. And it's really a hard lesson for the Capricorn woman to learn, as she has been programmed since childhood to really play the caretaker, particularly with her younger siblings. So of course there are those men who look for such mothering in a partner, such as Scorpio, for instance, and then those who see it as smothering, such as Aries. But ironically, the former scenario ends badly, while the latter might actually provide the goat with just the right kick in the pants to keep the focus squarely on herself. So after all, her best match is a man who is able to achieve all she foresees for him on his own terms, while she steadily kind of nurtures herself. Capricorn doesn't readily appeal to the good time men of the world. She's a woman who looks at life and relationships as requiring hard work. That is if they are to be beneficial ultimately in her life. So relatively speaking, she is considered something of a moral giant, and as such, most mere mortals feel lacking, even diminished in her intimate association. So life for this Saturn-ruled woman is like one long state of recovery, and she is typically plagued by compulsions, kind of more food than drink, or maybe a certain addiction to drugs or spending, which she's kind of forever atoning for with a signature kind of monkish intent. But when those so-called demons arise again, she's notorious for exorcising them, healing them better than most. But she expects those in her life to do the same. So it's fitting that the new year falls during the Capricorn birth period, because as the female of the sign is continually locked into one Saturn resolution or another, and I told you Saturn is all about kind of restrictions and boundaries and goals and things like that. So looking up to her is natural, but living up to her, that's another story altogether. It's often nothing short of a nightmare. So she is the one, like I told you, she's the only cardinal earth sign. So she exhibits this kind of uphill battle, worth the climb, but still posing a real challenge, if not a barrier to people who would be partners especially. And she is like that private club of one. She's automatically discouraging the male population from crossing her chilly door, while hopefully inviting someone equally self-important to ring her bell. And once Capricorn sees a man she wants, like an intellectual, spiritual, as well as physical attributes that she likes, she keeps her eyes on him, eventually securing subtle ways to make him do the pursuing, not her. So for no matter how much the man she is after is in high demand or hard to get, she will always somehow turn the tables, making her own self seem like the hard to get catch. And that is why, like I said, Scorpio men easily fall into the Capricorn woman's trap, because she kind of, tricks them into thinking that this is what he really wants, and she doesn't give in easily as well, making him feel like he's gained the ultimate prize, because Scorpio love the chase. And then especially when he realizes his usual ways of going after kind of the sunny, naive type beautiful woman is over, and he's fallen for a woman who really doesn't fit that bill at all, and he ends up thinking it's true love, and they usually end up living happily ever after. Check out my Scorpio man and Capricorn woman episode. It's already out because I did the series on Scorpio if you want to get more information on that compatibility. So she approaches sexual relationships the same as she does everything else. She's in it for the long haul. She's able to focus her attention on solid objectives, and she's not willing to entertain anything else along the way. And with her high standards, she rarely stops for brief encounters when the men she meets in her path, to securing the successful match that she really pictures, often since childhood. She has that dream guy in mind. And it's, when Capricorn makes her long-awaited love connection, she's really eager to see it stick. And for this reason, it's not unusual for the Capricorn woman to marry her first boyfriend, often doing so at a younger age, kind of fueled by the feeling that she's more mature and therefore ready. And as the embodiment of the preserver goddess archetype Rhea, Capricorn isolates what she perceives as good in a man and meditates and preys upon it, putting her belief fully in him and building him up to unimaginable heights. So the concept of prayer is very important to Capricorn as it signifies forward cardinal movement in the form of active faith and on a spiritual level, the type that might move mountains. And Capricorn woman, putting such spiritual faith in the one she loves, she really becomes her man's rock. She's his anchor. But seeing only the good in a loved one, she may also too easily kind of underestimate his negative qualities. She isn't so much forgiving as she is oblivious to human frailty. She's continually wiping out her own weaknesses, often having little patience for people who are troubled or otherwise heading down a kind of slippery slope. To be fair, the Capricorn woman avoids what she views as negative influences because she perceives herself as being overly susceptible to them. So she's predisposed to her Saturn ruler's sentiments, or crushing feelings of gloom or not like impending doom. The word tragedy comes from the Greek word tragodia, meaning goat song. So that's highly related to her. So this rallying of spiritual forces within her often reads as arrogance to most people, a sense that she is high on herself, but in truth, she must keep herself above the status quo. She kind of above that kind of lofty metaphoric place to which she was born to really keep herself from falling into the kind of depression that she was prone to in her childhood. So men who represent a run-of-the-mill lifestyle are simply not going to be for her. Such relationships she's going to see as flatliners, those that threaten to make her feel dead inside. She does not need that. She seeks the sublime and is thus drawn to vivid, extraordinary, often eccentric and erratic types with whom life she imagines will never be boring. And ironically, she's usually the one imposing relationship ground rules and regulations due to her, planet Saturn's, qualities. And the goddess Rhea, it must be remembered, brought commandments to the people in the same way as Moses did. And Capricorn woman kind of mirrors this need to impose restrictions on these highly intellectual, often extraordinarily talented types, such as entrepreneurs, scholars, philosophers, actors, producers, all of which she's notoriously drawn to. So laying down the law is really a preventative measure employed by the cautious Capricorn woman to really avoid potential domestic conflicts, any disturbances that are going to smack of second-rate mediocrity. And she's simply is not going to have it. She's in search of an uncommon love experience. So this also explains why the zodiac's most mindful and traditional character is famous for taking up with the unconventional types, those so seemingly unlike herself, such intense men who at first seemed so cool and unusual may soon become cruel and unusual. And Capricorn learns that living with a guy who goes too much against this societal grain is kind of a punishment for her, only repeating a childhood pattern that she so desperately tried to escape. So when it comes to the Capricorn woman's choice of partner, there's an element of opportunity that is very important to her because she will be focused on pointing out his talents and helping make use of it. She's also going to want to manage his career. Sometimes Capricorn woman copies his creative lifestyle, hoping to become well known as like the couple who, So it's really more accurate to say that she educates herself through her relationships. And she rarely does it with an older, wiser mentor. Instead, she kind of subconsciously seeks out someone her own age or slightly younger, kind of because, like I said, it goes back to her upbringing, how she was always kind of the caretaker of her younger siblings. So she feels more comfortable kind of being the older, mature one that's in charge. So this is the trade-off. She performs like a parental role as she did in her childhood, but at the same time, she learns how to play, which is something she never really had the chance to do. And since she usually had a stricter upbringing. So for this reason, Capricorn's partner above all else should be a playmate to her. You want to make her feel happy. You want to, be flirtatious, be fun, say jokes, get that gloominess, out of her system. So through recreation, she really begins to slowly access her own creativity, which has far so long been stuck. And the freeform part of herself, represented by that fishy tail of her sea goat symbol, really becomes her ultimate resource that she draws upon. So all her untapped talent that had threatened to bring her down into depression eventually becomes her most valuable asset. And it becomes the very sustenance that she needs to live. And that is what keeps her looking so young forever. So pretty much the Capricorn woman, sometimes surpasses her partner, having so much determination and inventiveness. So in this sense, she almost switches roles, with her partner, where he must learn to become that rock upon which she relies on, much like she used to do for him. And then our ugly duckling Capricorn woman, transforms into a beautiful, wise, and wacky swan. And meanwhile, the creative geniuses Capricorn generally goes for are drawn to her as well, since at first glance, she won't seem to them to be a competitor in any sense. So to be sure, she's really a supportive energy in her man's life, not the type to ever suggest that he must keep his day job. She'll support anything he does and push him to his potential. So in truth, Capricorn's notorious shows of faith are contagious, and her partner might soon find himself being paid for talents that he once only expressed as an idea or dream, but she really helps him turn it into reality. She's super loyal and deeply loving, and she really expects so little in return. She's also one of the more emotionally low maintenance females of the zodiac. She's not going to be the type to make your life hell or be dramatic. She's actually going to be more of a loner type and want time alone. She's stronger and more independent in nature, and she isn't the type to put people into a head trip. She rarely goes for such girlish role play. She actually doesn't usually like to have a lot of girlfriends. They can annoy her sometimes, because it just requires excess attention. Girls can sometimes just be gossipy and superficial, and she does not like that. She can also seem rather businesslike, and she's typically less superficial than even most men. So the Capricorn woman isn't comfortable being coddled, and it's not something that she really experienced in her childhood, and any lingering lack of self-confidence in her femininity only further prohibits it. So having been so discouraged from embracing her sexual side as an adolescent, the Capricorn woman really has no experience, in the concept of flirting and dating. And she's just too honest to engage in such behavior, which she considers to be somewhat phony. And she often doesn't date until her early 20s, sometimes taking as long to lose her virginity as well. So this probably explains why so many Capricorn women choose to date younger men, especially later in life. She wants to get a taste of sexually piquing boys, if only to get a glimpse of what she missed out on during her younger years. The unmarried Capricorn woman, and there are many of them, often take up exclusively with these younger men as they provide them pleasure, but also allow her to maintain that psychological control in the relationship, as well as her independent lifestyle. So she is less intimidated by the younger men, and she gives into their kind of sexual teacher fantasies, but particular to the academic Capricorn woman, especially, she's the one who's going to like that kind of sexual teacher fantasy type thing. But besides that, she just she likes that locked in freshness that college freshmen, have to offer. I mean, who wouldn't? So in contrast to her astrological neighbor, Sagittarius woman, who is the most obvious flirt on the zodiac wheel and probably universe too, for that matter, the Capricorn woman also tends to avoid public displays of affection. Even when in a relationship, she chooses to keep her private life exactly that. Capricorn, both men and women tend to be very private. They're not big fans of public affection. So she isn't looking for the intrigue from a relationship, but rather a solid working arrangement that she can really serve as a backdrop, for all she seeks to accomplish in her life. So her relationships tend to be, of the sizzling sorts, and sex is rarely the main motivation for forming a bond with someone. She's actually fairly conservative when it comes to her sexual persona, and she views intimacy that sex provides as a source of safety and comfort far more than as an intense workout or psychological release. Still, though, sex for the sea goat woman is a big deal, and she probably came into it relatively late in life. So freeing her, sexual sorry, what was I going to say? Her, erotic desires, often requires persuasion, the same amount of persuasion it took her kind of to tap into her creative spiritual side. So the Capricorn woman's sex and artistic expression are locked, if not blocked, actually, into the same place. She locks her emotional side. Patience on the part of her lover will probably be this woman's ultimate virtue. Be patient with her. Needless to say, her sex appeal is anything but superficial. And it takes a certain kind of man, to be able to withstand the slow freeing of this woman's carnal appetite. And there really is no rushing her. There's no rushing her lust. So she is intent on setting the pace in the relationship. And must sense that there's no hidden agenda in bed. It might come as a surprise that Capricorn isn't specifically marriage-minded. The whole idea of being kind of legally bound to another person seems to be like a rather misleading notion to her, one that really conflicts with her inherent philosophy that we are all essentially alone, born alone, die alone. And should it come to any legal entanglements, she would just as soon be left alone. The loss of control that marriage signals really tends to scare her, or at least make her worry a bit, gives her a bit of anxiety. She also doesn't typically believe in like wifely duties, or traditional wife duties, rarely being one who will switch on autopilot just because her partner expects it of her. There's really no manipulating Capricorn into doing anything, especially in the bedroom. All the guy has to do is apply even the slightest pressure, his hands on her head, for instance, and all sexual bets will be instantly off. So for that reason, too, anal sex tends to be a definitely no for her, as the act reeks of feminine submission, whereas doing it doggy style might satisfy the same urge in her man while hitting all the right spots for the Capricorn woman as well, not to mention allowing for free clitoral manipulation by either herself or her lover, by herself or her lover. Okay, so she isn't experimental by nature. She prefers to stick to the same well-loved, reliable sexual routine, even in the same order, so that way she knows what to look forward to next. Nowhere do we see the Capricorn woman's need for control as much as we do in the bedroom. But to her credit, she doesn't require a lot of attention to make sex special. Rather, she prefers to achieve a certain greatness by sticking to her usual path. Sex is not a dull affair for her. And as cliche as it sounds, to her, each time really feels like the first time. And this is another reason why she likes hooking up with the younger men, who share that same sense of newness that is naturally felt by guys still sexually wet, behind the ears per se. So when with an older partner, it also must not be dull, and she must feel that it is exciting. So Capricorn really finds that the anticipation of sex itself to be exciting, if not more so than the act itself. And the man who needs ever increasing stimuli will not be in her world for long. So she will always be as wide-eyed as a schoolgirl, forming endless crushes on men, if not those barely out of boyhood, letting her mind wander through all the romantic and intriguing possibilities that could serendipitously occur. And the wildest thing about the Capricorn woman is her love of fantasy, and especially the idea of covert sexual activity. She invents dream lovers in her waking hours, possibly fantasizing during masturbating over someone like her landscaper, her mailman, even her mechanic. As cliche as that sounds, she really enjoys interaction with men that are in service industries and whose job it is to be polite while doing her bidding. She might offer such a worker a cup of coffee or enter, into conversation with him that could be considered out of character by those who know her to be refined and kind of blunt. But if caught unaware, others are observing. Honestly, the Capricorn woman would surprise even her closest of friends, if you catch her off guard. She often has a real dream lover as well, someone who regularly factors into her nightly sex routine, someone who always comes into her fantasies when she's having sex, someone that she shares a recurring sexual theme with, often climaxing in actuality, which can give the kind of flesh and blood mate lying next to her somewhat of a jolt. So, what the Capricorn woman experiences in her subconscious affairs and lovemaking mirrors what she truly desires in her waking life. She may be rigid, but the Capricorn woman is anything but cold and unloving. But because sex doesn't top her list for a loving partnership, it can be a hit or miss for her in the sexual department. Eventually, as with everything, though, the Capricorn woman will realize the importance of sexual satisfaction in her life. And if her man is not quite cutting it, in that department, she may look elsewhere for that particular particular brand of satisfaction, which is where the tireless 20-something, guy comes into the equation, also kind of freeing her from any type of marriage contract. And it's important to note that though the Capricorn woman may see no conflict between satisfying her sexual needs elsewhere while still devoting her emotional self fully to her primary relationship, when it comes to love, her heart is always going to be in the right place, but if other parts of her aren't being used to full capacity, then the Capricorn woman might fill that hole with another man that is more willing and able to help. And her attitude is sophisticated. She views sex as an isolated experience, something that she simply wants done and done right. So it might not matter if she's in love with the man who falls short of pleasing her, while she employs a lover who will take her to such sexual heights. Still, though, she is not a big believer in unchecked passion, as it seems to be too dangerous a place to go for her, because after all, she is most concerned with taking her planetary ruler Saturn's quality of responsibility, if even for the sake of her own happiness. So she may even try to restrain her partner's more exhilarating expressions. And if any woman were to have that typical, librarians cautioning that shh during sex, it would be Miss Seagoat. So there's a very practical application, in fact, for the Capricorn woman's reasoning behind why she finds it best to contain herself even during sex. And it's that she finds that in doing so, she is further building up her own excitement. Chances are, given her slow climbing nature, that Capricorn woman's orgasms at a higher level than most women, because she holds back the temptation to let go until it's impossible to stop. So by suppressing her pleasure, she seeks to enhance the purity of the experience. For this ability, she thanks her lucky stars she's a woman, as all too often she witnesses a man's inability to pace himself and prolong the ecstasy of the sexual act. So she really dislikes rushed encounters, whether that is rushing friendships or relationships, and she judges men that are guilty of this behavior. So that is pretty much it for Capricorn woman, guys. I hope you benefited a lot from this episode. We pretty much went over everything. I mean, now you should have like a really good idea of, what it's like to be with a Capricorn woman, why they kind of act the way they do. I love Capricorn woman. I mean, my best friend's a Capricorn. I don't know many Capricorns, but she is amazing. She's always there for me. She's so sweet. She's responsible. She is like literally the best. Capricorn woman, like they are really great. So I hope that you gained a lot of information from this episode. Compatibility, like I said, for Capricorn woman will be released within the next 3 days. I usually release them in segments of 3 at a time or 4 at a time. So that will be coming up very soon. And that's usually like a 10-minute episode each, kind of going over, the basic kind of compatibility between the two signs, their relationship style, what house each one rules for each other and what that kind of means and represents, and also their sexual style and relationship and all that. All right, guys, thank you so much. And I will see you tomorrow for Stripping the Astrology of the Week.